Blake, pick a man, bring your kit.
If you aren't already familiar with the Oscar-nominated film, 1917 was the result of a collaboration between legendary director Sam Mendes and one of the all-time greats of cinematography, Roger Deakins. Months before its worldwide release, we all watched the behind-the-scenes videos of cameramen dressed as World War I soldiers running behind the camera. We watched Roger Deakins discuss the challenge of shooting the action sequences as if it was all one long take, in addition to the difficulties in lighting the scenes set in a German-occupied town cast in shadow and firelight. This had all the makings of a cinematic masterpiece, one that would surely be mentioned with the likes of Saving Private Ryan and Apocalypse Now as one of the greatest war films ever made. So why did we leave the theaters with a general lack of satisfaction? The answer lies in the very thing which set 1917 apart from the rest of its competition, and that is its gimmick. A gimmick is a trick or device intended to attract attention, publicity, or business. As much as it pains me to say anything against the works of Roger Deakins and Sam Mendes, 1917's much publicized decision to shoot the film as if the whole thing was one long take was exactly like a gimmick. The makers of 1917 wouldn't even be the first people to fall for this trap. Alfred Hitchcock, who is perhaps the greatest filmmaker in history, shot his classic 1948 murder mystery, Rope, as if it was one take. In some ways, this attempt was even more challenging than subsequent attempts, as Hitchcock had to switch out the film reel every 10 minutes. To this day, his decision to shoot Rope in that style is applauded because it had never been attempted to that extent. But the film's praise also shows its inherent problem. Everyone talks about Hitchcock and his gall for doing that, but no one talks about whether or not the film was any good. Was the story good? Was the acting? What did it actually contribute to the story, aside from being another showcase for Hitchcock to prove that he could truly do everything? Hitchcock, the master of suspense, forgot the purpose of the long take, and it appears that Sam Mendes has forgotten as well. So, let's discuss the two main purposes behind a long take, while also mentioning some exceptions. Number 1. To build suspense. The long take has become a staple in thrillers and suspense films because of its ability to make you hold your breath. One of the greatest examples of this is the opening shot of The Touch of Evil. In this opening sequence, we see a bomb being placed into the trunk of a car, and we follow it as the driver, completely oblivious, drives away with it. During the drive, we are also introduced to the protagonist of the film, Charlton Heston, who is discussing details about his life with the heroine, Janet Leigh, as they walk down the sidewalk. This entire time, we are aware of their proximity to the car and its dangerous package. Despite every obstacle, every bystander, and every roadblock in its path, we can't get our eyes off of the car introduced to us from the very beginning. When the driver and his passenger are stopped by border security to question their papers, we can't take it anymore. Finally, the protagonist and his wife share a kiss, and we hear the explosion before we see the burning wreckage of the car. To this day, I can't watch it without biting my nails from anxiety. And although the tension remains and questions abound, Orson Welles' decision to cut to the explosion was what made this long take perfect. It released the tension. Not all of it, but in the 3 minutes and 18 seconds since the film began, we'd felt the tension and suspense build with every second, and the failure to release that tension would have left a sense of unease and dissatisfaction. That is the first purpose of the long take. Number 2. Omniscience. The long take is, by its very nature, graceful. The smooth camera movements seem to weave through any calamity befalling the characters on the screen, and this detaches us from it all. A notable example of this would be the fight scene in Park Chan-wook's Oldboy. Yes, that fight scene. While there are certainly flashier examples, such as The Raid 2, Daredevil, and many other great action movies and television series, This fight scene exemplifies the sense of godlike omniscience that the long take can evoke, which is oddly reminiscent of the voyeurism achieved in Hitchcock's masterpiece, Rear Window. The fight scene begins with the protagonist, Desu, asking a corridor filled with hostile enemies to raise their hand if any of them have an AB blood type. Afterwards, Desu charges straight into the fight, dodging the first swing of a weapon and hitting the second opponent with a vicious blow. It's important to note that during this long take, the camera doesn't zoom, pan, or tilt. It only tracks to the left and to the right. Why? Because we are following our protagonist. This is why his enemies frequently run out of frame or run back in, making it impossible to actually figure out how many people he still has to fight. Even during a painful lull in the fight, the director doesn't cut. He watches and we wait. We wait for what happens next. This is telling us that we are not in this fight and we are not any of these people, but by refusing to move the camera into the fight or to shoot it from a higher angle, the director is also telling us that we are on the same level as these people. The scene ends with a medium shot of Desu after he's literally beaten everyone. The blurry but clearly bloody bodies behind him, filling up the negative space of the frame, make that quite clear. This also serves as our first cut since the beginning of the fight scene. An example of a long take that achieves both suspense and omniscience would be the 6-minute tracking shot in Season 1, Episode 4 of True Detective's critically acclaimed season. There are, of course, exceptions to the two purposes of long takes that I've listed, such as the well-known long take in Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, but the reason why that is an exception is too complicated to be discussed in this video essay. So, knowing all of that about long takes, and actually seeing some of the finest examples in cinematic history, how come it didn't work for 1917? The answer, ironically, is because there was no cut. The Touch of Evil opening sequence works because there was a cut, releasing the tension of the viewer and giving the film some much needed breathing room. Similarly, the omniscient perspective of Oldboy ends with a cut after he's beaten everyone in the corridor. These cuts are a filmmaker's way of communicating with the viewer on a subconscious level. It indicates a change in tone, a change in time, and perhaps most notably, a change in scene. Aside from one rather ham-fisted cut near the end of the film, 1917 does its best to make you feel as if there have been no cuts, even when there's nothing happening in the frame itself. Any tension that gets built dissipates due to the fact that there's no cut or relief being given to the viewer. Because of the film's structure, we have to watch the protagonist as he literally sits inside a troop transport. It is so painstakingly boring that the truck gets stuck in the mud just so that the protagonist has some action to do. For some contrast, we can look at Christopher Nolan's war film, Dunkirk, which can be considered the direct opposite of 1917 in both form and execution. Where 1917 makes you feel as if everything is in real time, Dunkirk strives to discombobulate its viewers as if they, too, are trapped with the soldiers, filling the frame with rapid cuts, Hans Zimmer's booming score, and unrecognizable faces. If you were to watch Dunkirk in 1917 within the same evening, you might feel whiplash. There is no denying that Sam Mendes and Roger Deakins have achieved something truly spectacular, and it's something that possibly Hitchcock himself, with the same tools at his disposal, might not have been able to do. However, 1917 exemplifies the idea that just because you can doesn't mean that you should. If you want to see what 1917 could have been, watch the trailer. Unfortunately, it is more satisfying than the actual film.